Chapter 379. Emotional memories were often particularly deep, but they were often distorted. From Luo Nan's impression, he had taken a step back. It was a true reaction of his mind. But the analysis of this quintessential post was reasonable and convincing. This created a contradiction. Should I believe the data, or should I believe my feelings? Luo Nan believed the former for now, but he still harbored some doubts. He continued to read, hoping to find a more decisive and convincing reason. The group of braggers was exposed when they replied to this point. They had a tendency to turn back to the main topic with great difficulty, but not long after, the following comments veered off the mark. The reason was that an ID called Unchangeable Gold had sent an emoticon of someone pinching their fingers fiercely. He added 3 simple words, "I was wondering." This Unchangeable Gold was certainly a public figure. After his reply appeared, a long string of comments directly quoted the contents of his speech. It had become the center of the topic. Boss Gold has been exposed. Queen Wu, be careful of the hooligan. So that's how it is. Gold has always been like this. Boss Gold, represent headquarters in an expedition to Xia City. Most of these comments were from 3 years ago. They called out Her Majesty Empress Wu's nickname from back in the day. The atmosphere was extremely enthusiastic. But this was not the most explosive point. A dozen or so messages later, a certain ID replied with the same quote from Unchangeable Gold. The content was even simpler. It was just a string of ellipses. But it was this simple symbol that caused a group of bored people to clamor as they pounced over. They replied one after another in remembrance. It was no wonder that they were not calm. The person who came later was the true source of all evil, the instigator of all evil. Wu Ming. No one knew what happened back then. The current ID of Her Majesty Empress Wu was dyed with the most distinguished purple-gold color of the society. She was the symbol of a veteran, a powerful person, and a person with real authority in the society. After she personally replied, the comments below truly exploded. One could vaguely feel the fiery atmosphere of the time from the dense overlapping of the messages. But strangely enough, there were still people who came to pay homage to this temporary hot spot. Luo Nan scrolled to the end and saw that the latter half of the replies were mostly, "Boss Gold is dead. Burn incense if you have something to do. Ambition is not far. The soul has returned. I don't believe that Boss Gold has disappeared. Sit and wait. Missing." The range of public figures who had been missing for 3 years was very small. Luo Nan subconsciously opened up Unchangeable Gold's personal page. The entire page was gray in color, but the information of his rank, position, achievements, and honor were all preserved. The puzzlement was hard to resolve, but it was also full of admiration. So much so that Luo Nan had a thought. It seemed that bowing to this legendary lady was not unacceptable. Another afternoon passed after Luo Nan finished reading the handouts and notes. The condensation ring gathered a small bead of water by Luo Nan's side. It was the size of a fingertip. This was already the limit of its volume. According to Her Majesty Empress Wu, Luo Nan's usage belonged to the thankless type. However, even that legendary lady would never imagine that Luo Nan possessed a production line that produced an unending stream of soul strength. When the in and the out were completely disproportionate, there was no need to measure anymore. It was fine as long as he was willful. With a slight stir of his thoughts, the bead of water he controlled was like a sword pill from a novel. It leaped and flew, coming and going freely in the room, doing as he pleased. The materialization of supernatural abilities gave him a greater sense of achievement compared to the soundless siege hammer. There was only half a day left in his closed-door cultivation. His plans could not keep up with the changes. Luo Nan's cultivation plan was far from reaching his expectations in order to clean up his mess. The dripping sword had become the most unexpected harvest. It should be firmly grasped. What? The star atlas of the format pyramid? Wouldn't that be a huge problem? In any case, Luo Nan had already developed a deep interest in the dripping sword. He even had feelings for it. Chapter 380. Luo Nan decided to press on with a spurt of energy. He grasped the 5 auxiliary structures of the dripping sword. In his opinion, this was possible. The 5 structures of amplification, acceleration, sharpening, explosion, and guidance were all built around the condensation ring. The complexity of the structure was low, and the requirements for precision were also very limited. Especially the range increase, acceleration, and guidance. These 3 structures that increased the effects of control were just extensions of the condensation ring. Luo Nan only needed an hour to master them very well. Of course, this was partly due to the sturdiness of the condensation ring, which allowed him to practice on it again and again. He did not have to worry that the crude auxiliary structure would explode and cause him to start all over again. Luo Nan was already able to make the fingertip-sized bead of water dance up and down within the room. If he urged it with all his strength, it would be like a streak of water slicing through the air. It would only be able to see the light, but not the shadow. Then it would slap onto the wall. It was truly a tragic car accident. The 3 auxiliary structures had exploded on the spot, and the water accumulated in the condensation ring had all been left on the wall, flowing down the wall. Only the structure of the condensation ring had withstood the test. Luo Nan also knew that the room wasn't suitable for training, so he cast his gaze towards the sun-covered courtyard. The condensation ring, which was still accumulating water, was driven by Luo Nan to smash into the screen window. The screen window was breathable, but this condensation ring was already at the micron level. The fine mesh had no effect on it. After exiting the window, in just 2 seconds, the auxiliary structure and water were all replenished. Luo Nan had a good feeling as he watched the water vapor gather and scatter around the condensation ring. Controlling the bead of water to fly here and there felt even better. Without the restraints of the ceiling and walls, the water droplets initially flew randomly in the yard, but then they spread out in circles. Finally, they passed through the roofs and branches of the community until they flew more than 2 kilometers away. People came and went in the community on the weekend, but no one noticed the water droplets passing over their heads. Even if they did, they would only catch a glimpse of the light at most. They could not understand the truth behind it. The water droplets that were controlled by soul power could naturally reach the location covered by soul power. However, Luo Nan also comprehended Her Majesty Empress Wu's philosophy as he operated. As the distance between him and the water drop sword grew longer, he needed to expend more soul energy to maintain his connection. It also required many auxiliary structures to adjust. While making use of them, they also had to pay attention to the problem of running in. After all, it was the interference of the mind with the material plane. If there was no order between the two, it would cause unnecessary consumption and interference. As for how to ensure the most effective cooperation, there was only one way: practice. Without going through hundreds or thousands of mistakes, it would be impossible to understand the subtle and complicated relationships hidden within. Needless to say, training full of mistakes also consumed a lot of energy. According to the general knowledge Luo Nan grasped during this period of time, even if the basic structure of the condensation ring wasn't damaged, Luo Nan just needed to adjust the other 3 auxiliary structures. It would take roughly half an hour to reach the limits of a mentally enhanced awakened. However, Luo Nan didn't need to consider the issue of consumption at all. He only felt that the feeling of hitting wherever you pointed, within a range of more than 10 square kilometers, was super cool. He even thought that if he extrapolated from this logic, wouldn't it mean that as long as his soul left his body, wouldn't he be able to run around the streets with the dripping sword? Moreover, with his soul body sensing range, if he was in the Nade district, he would be able to cover the entire Nade district. If he was in the River Wu district, he would be able to surround the entire River Wu district. How was this dripping sword compared to the flying sword in the ancient legends to behead people? Thoughts spun in and out of his mind, but in the end, he just shook his head in self-mockery. The lethality of the dripping sword was extremely limited, and it was difficult to control and transform it. There was a most basic bottleneck that determined his train of thought to be nothing more than wishful thinking. The out-of-body state was similar to what ancient metaphysics called the yin spirit leaving one's body. There was no material medium. Though one could travel 1,000 miles in one night, one could not do anything to the material world. There was no interference power to speak of. In this way, as long as his soul left his body, the condensation ring would naturally. Luo Nan's mind was suddenly stupefied. After the blank period passed, his previous train of thought was completely washed clean. The following thoughts were like grasslands after a spring or summer rainstorm. They grew endlessly. What would happen? What would happen to the condensation ring after his soul left his body? That's right. Soul strength needed to have a material medium in order to be used in the material world. If he first left his body and then made the condensation ring, his interference power would not reach a certain level. He would never be able to carve it into shape. But now, he had already made the condensation ring in advance. He had embedded this precise structure into the boundary between the mental and material planes. Though its nature was rather subtle, it was already in actual existence from the perspective of the material plane. It was tantamount to him having made a machine. This machine could automatically gather raw materials, water molecules, and carry out production. All that was left for him to do was to fill it with fuel, soul strength. In this way, when his soul left his body, the condensation ring would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the carrier. It would be possible to realize interference. Wasn't that right? Luo Nan lay down on his bed, cutting off all his thoughts. It was better to directly test things out than to think about it. Even if he failed, he would only lose a fine-level condensation ring. At this stage, he would just lose a piece of blue equipment. As he mentally prepared himself, he decisively went into an out-of-body state. In the next second, he pulled his soul out of his body and floated out the window. He floated side by side with the 1 centimeter diameter water bead under the warm afternoon sun. There was quite a bit of time between now and noon, but the slanted rays of sunlight and the dense yang energy in the air still transformed into formless astral winds. They blew endlessly against his soul body, and the consumption of soul strength suddenly rose by a large amount. There were very few B-rank powers who could go into an out-of-body state. Very few of them would brazenly go astray in the day and compete with nature in the first 2 or 3 years after they reached this realm. Student Luo Nan relied on the format pyramid production line to produce soul strength in an unending stream. He had abundant stamina and was able to do this willful method. Luo Nan still didn't consider the problem of consumption. Right now, he only paid attention to the condensation ring. The water bead had yet to collapse on the purely material plane, and there was no obvious wear and tear. As for the condensation ring at its core, it was extremely stable. It steadily consumed soul strength. Everything was calm and tranquil. It was natural. This feeling was like being engraved in a lens. It was preserved in a negative, the moment of a swift paddling through the water. Though the watermark was shallow, it was nearly permanently engraved. The infusion of Luo Nan's soul strength gave this simple remnant image a new layer of color. Through a different form, it obtained a life force. Perhaps there was a problem with the analogy he chose. Right now, Luo Nan's heart was filled with a swift, causing a nearly delusional realization to appear in him. It involved the mutual interference between the mental and material worlds. Luo Nan felt that when the interference occurred earlier, the user seemed to have warped time and space to an extremely small extent. The user had intercepted an extremely minute fragment from the endless river of time that Luo Nan had experienced. Then, the user had used soul strength to endow it with new meaning. Damn it. This topic was too deep. If Luo Nan thought a bit deeper, his brain capacity would explode. Plus, his train of thought had clearly gone astray, so he decisively gave up. In any case, the facts before his eyes verified Luo Nan's initial thoughts. There was no problem at all with continuing to control the condensation ring after his soul left his body. The two naturally intersected. There was a continuation of a timeline and a cause and effect relationship. Who created who? Who attached to who? It formed a very interesting circle. Luo Nan had a faint conjecture. Perhaps other mentally enhanced ability users wanted to use their soul bodies to interfere with the material world. They should have done so through similar methods. That was to first create a stable tool that could be attached to. It could be a condensation ring, a hot air balloon, or a glider. As long as there was a small object that could intervene between the mental and material planes, then it would be like what was said in philosophy classes. Humans create and use tools. They are different from all other animals. Then they change the world. Of course, not just any condensation ring could achieve this function. The condensation ring Luo Nan created was a piece of blue equipment. Yes, it was possible that it was a piece of purple equipment. This condensation ring had certainly crossed a certain threshold in terms of precision. It had met some strict standards. Only then was it able to maintain stability for a long period of time in the boundary zone between the mental and material planes. Only in this way could it become a tool, a machine, and not a mere delusion. Luo Nan's soul soared into the air. His soul strength continued to act on the condensation ring, forming an unquestionable interference force. The water bead's bearing capacity was quite weak. Luo Nan tried to add a bit of force, and the bead collapsed into mist. However, the condensation ring structure remained stable, and it continued to gather water. Luo Nan certainly needed to make adjustments if he wanted to go a step further. Luo Nan pondered over the technique within, but his brain was a bit too excited right now. His train of thought was erratic and hard to control. He had just had some inspiration for micromanipulation when a string of seemingly splendid thoughts suddenly burst forth in his mind. Yet he could not find the reason for them, stirring them into a pot of porridge. All right, this was just a reminder. He should not forget himself from excitement. Perhaps he had overlooked something. He could think deeper. Were there any relevant factors that he had not considered? Luo Nan pondered for a while to no avail, so he changed his perspective. What problems had he not resolved over the past 2 days? The economic crisis in the format pyramid, the remodeling of the star atlas, the root receptacle, the root nature, and the root nature, the outsourcing of Her Majesty Empress Wu's business, the paranoia of his aunt and uncle, the setback in the exploration of the mysteries of gear. Luo Nan only discovered that there were so many unresolved problems on his body after a rough combing through. This was still a time of peace. If the threats from headquarters, the Order, and Quantum Corporation were added in, would he still want to live? Luo Nan reflexively wanted to rub his own head. He wanted to see what sort of person was capable of stirring up all these threads together. However, it was his soul body that moved. The body lying on the bed in the room was motionless. This was the inconvenience of a mental journey. Hiss. The spiritual light was like a blade, instantly severing all of his chaotic thoughts. It was also like an electric shock. The powerful light tore through his mind, illuminating the hazy world for a time. Stimulated by the spiritual light, an object that existed within his brain but was not part of his flesh and blood appeared. It trembled endlessly as his soul strength entered and exited it. The external neuron. Luo Nan finally thought of it. He had pondered over how to interfere with the source of the material plane after his soul left his body. Wasn't it because of the external neuron? That night, his soul left his body to explore the mysteries of gear, but it was difficult to enter. He speculated that it was very likely because he did not bring the external neuron with him. Later, he tried to absorb it purely with his soul strength, but he failed miserably. Then he created the reversal of true energy, using the material to interfere with the mental. He burned and refined it, but there were no results. But now, the condensation ring had fallen from the sky and brought him around a corner. It had actually easily and skillfully crossed the great gate of his soul, interfering with the material world. With the support of the condensation ring, his out-of-body soul was able to possess interference power without going through his fleshly body. Couldn't this method be used with the external neuron? Right? Right? The thought was unstoppable once it formed. Luo Nan was unable to continue thinking. His soul body immediately threw itself back into the room, restoring the faintly discernible connection with his fleshly body. Then he willed it, stimulating the external neuron to produce a response. There were no surprises. The electric dragon that remained within his brain radiated a brilliant radiance. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it swam outwards. Electricity seeped out from between Luo Nan's eyebrows in the next moment. Luo Nan instantly severed the direct connection between his soul and fleshly body. The external neuron had just thrown itself outside his body when it lost its guidance. After the external neuron was absorbed into his body, this transmission relationship was completely assimilated into the interior of his soul body. The process was roughly like this: the soul body would first pour soul strength into the condensation ring that the external neuron had reconstructed. The power of nothingness would naturally possess the nature of interference power. It would gather the water molecules in the void. Under the high-speed flying state, the bead of water would be lost at every moment, but it would be endlessly replenished. The early stages of the accumulation of water molecules existed on the nanometer scale. Luo Nan could do nothing about it, but he could sense the large-scale condensation of water vapor in the later stages. This feeling was like the soul body inhaling and exhaling water vapor, carrying out a peculiar breathing. It naturally formed a connection with the outside world. In the traditional sense, the soul body was only at the level of a yin soul. Of course, it was impossible to realize such a connection. In fact, the source of this phenomenon came from the new version of the condensation ring. The interference power emitted by the condensation ring gathered water, and it acted back on the soul body itself. It permeated into every corner of the soul body. And then, Luo Nan's high-speed flight came to an abrupt stop. He hovered high in the sky, and below him was the stream of light from the aircraft whistling past. It was as if the entire city was operating at high speeds. Only he stood alone in the sky, distancing himself from the world below him. He didn't have the leisure to sigh with emotion. He just happened to find an interesting processing machine for his soul strength. This machine swallowed nothing and came out something. It absorbed 0 and came out 1. It burned nothingness and condensed reality. This was the condensation ring. This was the external neuron. As the interference power gradually pervaded, it was as if a set of incorporeal skeletal meridians had been stuffed into the soul body. It was draped with flesh and tendons of the same nature. Well, this description was a bit too exaggerated. A more realistic way of saying this was that Luo Nan's soul body seemed to be plated with a layer of gradually closing incorporeal yet marvelous membrane under the full effect of the interference power. Figuratively speaking, Luo Nan's soul body seemed to have turned into a cloak. Luo Nan's core consciousness resided in the center, and he made contact with the mental and material worlds at the same time through this cloak. The cloak became the facet of the mental and material worlds, intersecting with both planes. It was thin to the point of nothingness, but it had marvelous effects. Luo Nan's consciousness was wrapped in this cloak, and it had a bit of an independent flavor. It seemed that there was an indescribable layer of separation between the mental and material planes. Chapter 383. The skin of the beast was dark red, and its bulging muscles were covered with a layer of fine scales. Its bald skull was wrapped in a thick layer of wrinkled skin. The top of its skull was deeply caved in, and its eyes bulged out. Its pupils were dark red, and its background was dark yellow. Its mouth and nose were almost indistinguishable, forming a circle of dark purple that looked like a paste. Saliva flowed from its mouth, making it ugly and ferocious. Just by looking at its appearance, there was no doubt that it was some kind of mutant species. It looked a little like a gibbon, but it was 100 times uglier. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this fellow belonged to the type of mutant that had already been discovered. In any case, he had no impression of it at all, so he gave it the name of mush-mouth ape at the last minute. At this moment, the rotten-mouth ape was staring straight at him with its crimson eyes. It was clear that the enemy was able to lock onto Luo Nan's specific location on the mental plane even though the enemy was unable to attack him. Just this point alone surpassed the vast majority of people Luo Nan had encountered. After about a minute, the mush-mouth ape seemed to have grown tired of the pointless staring. Its strong body slowly sank and disappeared into the clouds. Its gaze never left Luo Nan's location until the very end. Its gaze was turbid, but it possessed the cruelty and greed of a predator. This made Luo Nan understand that this mush-mouth ape was treating him as prey. It had no intention of giving up in the short term. As long as it grasped the opportunity to break through the isolation on the mental plane, it would slaughter its way over without the slightest hesitation. It would tear Luo Nan to pieces, then it would devour and digest him. Some time later, Luo Nan's thoughts were verified. Sure enough, the mush-mouth ape didn't leave. It maintained a high level of patience and intense desire. It constantly wandered around Luo Nan's surroundings, ready to make a move. Sometimes, it really did launch an attack. Its tyrannical and overbearing attack pattern was able to exert pressure on Luo Nan even if its attacks failed. From this point alone, the mush-mouth ape truly lived up to its name as a top predator. It was trying to turn a failed ambush into a marathon of death that tested its endurance and determination. Controlling his soul in the depths of the mental plane at all times to avoid the attack range of the mush-mouth ape was indeed quite tiring. He had to use the cloak to interfere at all times, and the consumption of his soul power was considerable. But it needed to be emphasized once more, Luo Nan wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. Important things must be repeated 3 times. It wasn't easy to move around in the depths of the mental plane. All right, there must be a target. Luo Nan's chaotic thoughts finally became clear. But after becoming clear, his first thought was to slap himself in the face. If his guess was correct, he had personally thrown the target in. It was that snake tongue. That's right. He had hurriedly entered and exited the cloud layer through gear that day. Luo Nan still had Snake Tongue, who had suffered a backlash from the curse, in his hands. He didn't know how he had thrown Snake Tongue away, but he thought about it carefully. Indeed, it was most likely that he had thrown her here. If this was the case, Snake Tongue wouldn't have suffered a backlash from the Nightmare Vine spell while she was in a fugue state. She shouldn't have fallen to her death and been here for 10 days, right? Luo Nan was a layman when it came to the curse branch. But after that day, he did some understanding of Snake Tongue. He knew that this woman was one of the few curse experts of the inner world. Her mental state was extremely formidable. No matter how fierce the backlash from the curse was, it wouldn't be able to trap her for long. If he were to consider this line of thought, then the current situation would have a relatively clear explanation. Of course, this was pure conjecture. Perhaps his mind was obstructed, and his train of thought was wrong, leading him in the opposite direction. But in any case, Luo Nan's current mood was showing signs of worsening. The joy and sense of accomplishment from overcoming countless difficulties and finally entering the cloud world had long since been scattered by the volcanic eruption of the mush-mouth ape. But before he could sort things out, he thought about the matter with snake tongue. He thought about the great secret his mother had hidden for many years. He didn't even have a clue about the bizarre and wonderful cloud world, and he had been tossed about by a wandering soul for 10 days. What if some extremely valuable clue was destroyed by snake tongue? Or perhaps she deliberately hid it and spread it. What should he do? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. Luo Nan made a firm resolution to find snake tongue. If she was alive, he wanted to see her. If she was dead, he wanted to see her. Even if he was dead, he wanted to see convincing evidence. Luo Nan pondered for a moment and chose to follow a mush-mouth ape. He would observe it for a long time before making a decision. But the stalking didn't go smoothly. Luo Nan's chosen target wasn't the one that had attacked him before. It was just a random choice. This fellow's body was a bit smaller, but it was just as valiant. Luo Nan was deep in the mental plane, exceeding the attack range of the mush-mouth ape, but the ape still sensed him. The long stalking caused the target to react greatly. It turned around to chase and attack many times, but it was never able to touch Luo Nan's true body. This was a sign that the eye's orifice and the mouth and tongue orifice were resonating with each other. Luo Nan originally thought that he would need at least 10 days of effort. He never thought that there would be results in less than 3 days. It had to be said that this was closely related to the great supplement pill that the wraith sign had forcefully swallowed. Xuelei, who was next to Luo Nan, nodded over and over as he listened to the signs that appeared on Luo Nan's body. You've really entered the threshold of fleshly body tempering. Let's practice Sanzhou this afternoon. Let's spar. Luo Nan shot a glance at Xuelei's arm that could reach his thigh. He didn't respond to Xuelei's words. He just asked, tonight, the large activity area, Frost River reality. You're going to? Xuelei obviously wouldn't refuse. He even reminded Luo Nan, don't cause trouble. Leave early and go home. Cause trouble? Luo Nan shrugged. It's done. Then I'll see you at gear. Let's practice Sanzhou first. Xuelei emphasized once more. I have a class today. Doesn't that just leave notes on the most important people of the world? New class. Luo Nan blinked his eyes. He reached out and grasped the air. Then he opened his palm. A bead of water appeared to be stuck to his palm, but it was actually suspended in midair, spinning and spinning. There were only 2 classes in the afternoon, and they were related to writing. In any case, Luo Nan wasn't too interested in them. He didn't pay too much attention to the specifics. He just moved his finger slightly, letting the small bead of water revolve between his fingers. This bead of water was not the external neuron that had undergone a rebirth. It was condensed later. The condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures were complete. The bead of water swam across his fingertips like a blunt blade cutting across skin. It looked as if it could collapse at any time. This was not an illusion. If Luo Nan exerted a bit too much force with his fingers, it would be tantamount to placing a bomb on his fingertips. He would suffer. Luo Nan's control over his fleshly body was far from enough. If he practiced for too long, an accident would certainly occur. He completely relied on mental control. This was a relatively good training method. It was one of the daily cultivation techniques taught by Her Majesty Empress Wu in the intermediate training class in Xia City. But right now, Luo Nan's mind wasn't completely focused on it. The wraith sign had just sent a signal. After over an hour of tossing and turning, the unlucky elder Mo Luan had finally returned to his secret hideout. He was communicating with the others. This was a high-class member suite of a large fitness center. The interior of the room was decorated in a purplish-red color. The lighting was dim, and it carried a bit of an exotic atmosphere. The room wasn't small, but there were only 2 wooden armchairs set up in the corner. Chapter 387. Mrs. Halder was a woman that left a deep impression on people. Luo Nan had the temperament of a homebody. He didn't really recognize people, but he never forgot her from the first time he met her. Yes, it must be admitted that Mrs. Halder's image was quite good. She was around 40 years old, and she was in the gym room right now. She wore a deep purple knitted wool dress and stockings of the same color. She paired it with black velvet high heels. Her hair was tied up in a seemingly casual bun, and a few locks hung down the side of her forehead. She was elegant and concise, like a noble woman who had been in a high position for a long time. However, her somewhat westernized three-dimensional silhouette, her deep eye sockets, her quiet and serene gaze, and the strange slender bloody scar on her right cheek gave her a tough and callous aura. Upon closer inspection, she looked more like a strong woman who had experienced many experiences. In the secular world, she was indeed a queen of the business world. The high-class fitness center they were in right now was one of her businesses. She had inherited her husband's Castle Financial Group, and it had rapidly expanded over the past 10 years. She controlled several well-known fashion and sports brands, and her influence in the field of entertainment and sports grew more and more astonishing. Luo Nan had once looked up information on Mrs. Halder. She was a legendary figure in Xia City. During the Dark Age, when the Blood Flame Order was internally divided, the reigning chief oblatum of the order cowered before the chaotic conflict of doctrines. This caused the order's sacrificial vessel to be destroyed, causing irreparable losses. In the moment of life and death, it was this Mrs. Halder who beheaded the previous oblatum, her husband. Furthermore, with his strong conviction, he had withstood the violent backlash of the blood flame will. Amidst the raging blood flame, he had inherited the position of officiant. He had also relied on the rapidly expanding financial resources of the secular world to stabilize the situation during the order's relatively weak stage, preserving this branch of the blood flame order. The bizarre bloody scar on her right cheek was the mark of the ultimate trial of the blood flame will. It was the testimony of the soul-stirring events of the past. Due to her actions of beheading and killing her husband, she became known as the Black Widow of the inner world. Her reputation was terrible, but within the Blood Flame Order, her prestige was unparalleled. Practically everyone was awed by her unyielding and iron-blooded nature. Even a senior elder like Mo Luan was extremely respectful toward her. At this moment, aside from Madame Halder, who was seated on a chair, everyone else was standing. Vice First Oblatum Yin Lu, who had once crossed paths with Luo Nan, leaned lightly on a treadmill beneath the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the wooden corridor outside. The 120 steps of blood sacrifice are the most difficult. Just based on the current scale of the order, it is a bit strenuous to perform sacrifices day and night. If we could have this kind of sacrifice. Ren Hong also agreed. That's right. The Order of Justice acted earlier than us. It is said that before Enwing's accident, the Order of Justice had already sent the human-faced arachnid to headquarters. In other words, no matter how we graze in Xia City, it will be hard to gather a complete human-faced arachnid. If we want the mold to be effective, it is hard to avoid seeking other methods. Right now, it looks like the mold's devouring ability still has room for expansion. This is a good thing. Yin Lu was a bit more pessimistic. It's hard to make a judgment just by looking at an example. Jiang Yuanjin clapped her hands. You'll have to ask Mo Luan about this. It was dangerous this time, but if we can really find a way to assist in the blood sacrifice, then it would truly be a boundless merit. Just as her voice fell, a mass of light and shadow unfurled in the center of the room. Mo Luan did not participate in the conversation from start to finish. He just transformed the relevant memories into energy information that could be recognized by specialized equipment. Then he transformed it into an image, allowing the core members of the order to understand the situation at the time. This sort of ability to reproduce memories seemed simple, but in reality, only those who had a deep understanding of the mind and the soul could do it. Luo Nan felt ashamed of his inferiority to Mo Luan's deep and ruthless ability. As the light and shadow changed, it was tantamount to replaying Mo Luan's experience at the time. Due to the nature of human thought, it was hard to avoid subconscious processing and distortions. However, it was enough to serve as a reference. Luo Nan found the scene of the incident familiar. He thought about it carefully and recognized that this was the recycling stratum of the Twin River district. This place was filled with gangs and negative emotions. It was indeed one of the best places for the human-faced arachnid to reside. Mo Luan gave a brief introduction of the background. He used the mental plane to directly transmit telepathically. However, Luo Nan could hear everything clearly due to the mental connection between him and the wraith sign. I was just doing my routine patrol at the time. Mold suddenly became very excited. I thought that it had discovered prey, so I immediately went over. But then I saw a bird. It wasn't a bird, right? Jiang Yuanjin relied on his age to speak more casually with Mo Luan. Mo Luan didn't bicker with him. He responded calmly, indeed. I only discovered that it wasn't a bird when I got closer. It was a wing-hand bloodbat. Wing-hand bloodbat. Actually, Luo Nan was already stupefied when he saw the image. Mo Luan's explanation only gave him a confirmation. It really was a wing-hand bloodbat. Chapter 388. Too tough. This was Jiang Yuanjin's evaluation. It could be said that she was right on the mark. This wing-hand bloodbat was a lot thinner than the image data Luo Nan had seen. Luo Nan still remembered the countless number of wing-hand bloodbats fluttering under the setting sun and the information provided by Trigate security. Though they weren't large in size, every single one of them was like a savage and powerful canine. Their four claws were sharp, their muscles were solid, and their fur was glossy and smooth. Their skin and bat wings were a bit dim, but they were powerful in their flaps. One look and one could tell that they weren't easy to mess with. However, the one Mo Luan encountered was a typical symptom of dysplasia. Its wingspan was at most 20 centimeters, and it was shriveled and skinny. Only its eyes were blood red, giving it the feeling of extreme insanity. It wasn't even 11:30 in the morning at the time. It was the end of the day on the recycling stratum, the time when the visible light was the most. This wing-hand bloodbat shuttled back and forth between the sunlight and the shadows. Its skin and bat wings let out a strange sound when they flapped. According to the information provided by Trigate security, this wing-hand bloodbat was an estrus. Of course, it was unable to find its own kind to satisfy it within the boundaries of Xia City. This made it all the more irritable. Perhaps it was this kind of emotion that attracted the human-faced arachnid to discover its target. The wraith sign immediately pounced over restlessly. Unfortunately, these two vicious creatures weren't dealing with the problem of estrus. They were engaged in a life-and-death battle. From the perspective of a normal person, they would at most see the bat's shadow circling in the air. They wouldn't be able to see the deeper mysteries. However, the light and shadow displayed Mo Luan's memories of the time. The levels and details were far richer. This was the first time Luo Nan saw an ability user's memories of the mental plane. He couldn't take his eyes off it for a time. The conflict between the two sides erupted in an extremely direct manner. The wraith sign revealed a human face and an arachnid body. It had 6 eyes and 8 feet, and a chaotic and berserk mental attack radiated out. The wing-hand bloodbat's reaction was a bit slower, but its counterattack was extremely fierce. It didn't use its claws and other substantial weapons. Only its eyes deepened by a shade, and a dazzling bloody mist soared from its body. Thousands of human faces could be vaguely seen as it soared. There were also strange demonic shadows interweaving, treacherous and savage. Such a situation greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. Therefore, even though Jiang Yuanjin knew that this was a scene reenactment, she still cried, "Ah," from the gym. At this moment, Mo Luan's perspective was very close. The Wraith sign wasn't involved in this. That fellow had already changed his breeder, and was currently recuperating at the headquarters of the Blood Flame Order. Luo Nan relied on Ink. Ink flapped its wings and flew up, circling within the shadows of the tall building. Behind the tightly sealed doors and windows, pairs of eyes stared at this enormous bird. They were either excited or terrified. Luo Nan himself didn't know that this crow was a celebrity in the recycling stratum of the River Wu district. News of the great battle with Jack a month ago had spread through the ubiquitous criminal channels of this place. The residents who lived here more or less knew that a powerful and mysterious power had crushed the Jack Mafia that originally occupied this place. The main force of the mysterious power was a burly man. This was too lacking in uniqueness, so people took the initiative to choose a more legendary symbol, a large crow. The mysterious power had the special ability to control crows. Every time a crow's cry was heard, a calamity would descend, causing one's mind to go insane and fall unconscious. Jack Mafia's well-equipped sniper squad was easily defeated in this way. In the end, the mysterious power didn't take control of the recycling stratum. The territory of the Jack Mafia was divided among other powers, large and small. However, due to the free and unrestrained behavior of the mysterious power, the surrounding residents, who had been tossed and turned by the gangs for a long time, unconsciously felt a bit of reliance on the mysterious power. Perhaps the mysterious power taking control of the recycling stratum would bring about a completely different and new life. Driven by such emotions, the reappearance of the enormous crow caused a considerable portion of the residents of the recycling stratum to feel a surge of emotion. It also caused a large number of gang members, who had gathered here due to the unknown value of the scene of the incident, to tremble with fear. Luo Nan didn't understand the cause and effect, but he could feel the actual psychological effect that Ink's appearance brought to the surrounding people. If the mental state of the surrounding people could be said to be a sprinkling of magnetic sand before, then Ink, who was shuttling back and forth between the shadows of the tall buildings, was like a powerful magnet. No matter where the magnetic sand was scattered, it would stand erect, aiming the magnetic poles of the opposite direction at Ink's location. From the perspective of the living starry sky, hundreds and thousands of stars were affected by the gravitational pull of Ink's constellation. They moved in unison, incomparably uniform. At the same time, the stars that weren't affected by the magnetic force were especially eye-catching. A considerable portion of them had a corresponding uniform displacement pattern. It was just that they were incompatible with the system Luo Nan had set up.